Welcome, everyone. Thank you for your patience and waiting as we got everyone sorted out. But welcome to our topic today at Hamilton's Education Law Program. Discussion featuring several young advocates, about 7 today. Our topic today is young advocates in Ontario's education system. So Ontario's education system is continuously evolving. Researchers, politicians, teachers, and parents all play a role in shaping our local school systems. But the input of young people is often not included in high-level conversations. So in this video discussion today, we're going to speak to young people who have recently studied at school boards across Ontario and one outside of it, but nonetheless, we have very significant voices here, and they're going to share their personal experiences in public advocacy and the experiences that they've witnessed and witnessed firsthand that has been used to shape their advocacy and improve the system in Ontario's education system. So I'm gonna quickly just start the PowerPoint presentation. Just some house rules before we go. We have several young people who will be speaking today. They're each gonna share with us their different positions on several questions that we have for them. We're going to ask that questions be left until the end. You can feel free to send a message in the chat to let us know those questions are. Otherwise, we will have some follow-up time at the end for you to pose any questions that come to mind. I will allow the young advocates to answer those questions as they're presented at the end. All right. So we'll get right into it. So like I said, we have several advocates who are here today. I'm going to just go through each slide. And as I go through each slide, I'm going to have each young person just give us an introduction about themselves. You can let us know what school boards or what region are you coming from. Share with us something that may be unique to the school board or region that you're in. And what's your stake in Ontario's education system? So I'm going to allow each advocate to take their turn as we see them on the screen. So we have Sally.
Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you for having me here. I think it's such an important discussion that we're having today. As on screen, my name is Sally Meseret, and I'm the former president of the Ontario Student Trustees Association, and I'm a former student trustee from the Durham District School Board. And I think, I think in this time in particular, as we're kind of seeing equity come into education in a way that we probably haven't before, I think that intersection has been very interesting for me, and I think that education has such a huge impact on society as a whole. So being able to advocate within it and kind of make changes within it has been really potent in my life, and I think hopefully it will make a difference in others' lives as well.
Thank you so much. Next we have Batul.
Hi, my name is Batul. Thank you for having me. I'm a member of the HFDSB Kids Need Help. We are a group of former and current students within the Hamilton-Wentworth District School Board who work to organize, do a lot of community organizing and a lot of advocacy work, within our community. I am not in high school anymore, but I'm a former student of Westhill Secondary School. Something unique about our school board, we recently, with the help of community organizers as well as the HWDSB Kids Need Help's organizers, we were able to get the Hamilton-Wentworth District School Board to terminate the SRO program that they had. So.
Yeah, that was a big win, definitely for the school board, and I think for other education systems who
Absolutely.
might be able to follow off of that. Thank you so much, Batul. Next, we have Gregory. Yep. All right, Gregory, maybe we'll come back to you afterwards. Just let us know when you're available, okay? Ahona.
Hi.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh my gosh. Of course I'm the one to really be doing this. But
No problem, man.
my Wi-Fi just cut out. My name is Greg Duggan. I was the Black Youth Council president of Bernie Custis last year, and I've been working with the HWDSB Kids Needs Help and a ton of different stuff throughout the city.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Greg, and for your advocacy as well. Thank you. All right, Ahona.
And hi everyone, I'm Ahona. I was the former student trustee for the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board this past year, and also a member of the Student Trustees Association. And I'm also a member of the HWDSB Kids Need Help Coalition. And I think something really important that's come forward recently is myself, along with another former student trustee from the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, came forward with instances of racism among the trustee board. And that's a really important discussion considering the fact that these are people making decisions regarding high-level policy. And so, yeah, this is a really important discussion. I'm looking forward to, speaking with all of you on this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. Absola.
Hi everyone, my name is Abisola Asha. I actually graduated like 5 years ago, so I'm pursuing my master's at Ryerson soon in social work. And I'm one of the co-founders of Students Speak Up, Your Catholic District School Board. This came about because a lot of students have been speaking about their experiences with oppression, marginalization, and various microaggressions within their classroom, all tied back to anti-Black racism. So yeah, so that's one of the most interesting things about your Catholic District School Board at the moment. So yeah, thank you folks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Benjamin.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Benjamin McDonald. So I attended public school for 8 years, and then for my high school years, I spent my 4 years there. So for 8 years, I was in that system, and I had an overall negative experience, and there was a lot of negative perceptions of students. Meanwhile, at my private school, the teachers there really believed in me. So my stake in this education system is, I have a lot of family, community members, neighbors who are in public schools across Ontario. And really, I want to, make sure that they have enjoyable experiences and fair experiences in the education system. So, and something unique to my board, I guess we're the second largest board in Canada. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And then we have Jan.
Hi everyone, it's an honor to be included as part of this panel, especially because I joined the education advocacy space very recently. I actually grew up in Vancouver and I was part of the Vancouver School Board there. But recently I am the co-founder and co-exec of a nonprofit called Starts With One Canada. We focus on teaching and advocating for education justice, and we do this in 2 ways. We run an education justice coalition, which is a group of soon-to-be teachers, current students, and also parents that are interested in researching and advocating for justice in our education system in Ontario. So that's the Education Justice Coalition, and Starts With One also runs a tutoring program for kids who wouldn't normally be able to afford extra help with their schoolwork. And so the majority of these children do come from the Toronto and Peel regions. And so that's my stake in the education system here in Ontario. I'm very passionate about ensuring that everyone has equitable access to education. And just to echo what Sally already mentioned, education is such a foundational aspect of our society. And I think it affects our society in ways that many people don't realize. And so, yeah, it's my honor to be on this panel today and to share a little bit about what I've learned over the last few months. So thanks, Alex, and to everyone else here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to all panelists again for taking your time to speak with me and just have other people listen to what you have to say today. One of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation is because we so often don't have an opportunity to hear young people or younger people talk about very high level issues in education. And there are quite a few questions that are very significant to the education system that should really have the input of young people. So some of the questions I'm going to be touching on today focus on some of these higher level issues. And our audience can definitely suggest some questions for our panelists at the end. But we're just going to go through about a dozen or so questions with our panelists who will each take turns to answer a given question. But we'll jump right into it. And we're going to focus on Ontario's education system and questions related to kind of a big picture overview. So the first question I have will be for Batul and Benjamin. Now, have you noticed a shift in public education, in the perception of public education in the past few years? And if so, what is that shift? And I'll get Batul perhaps to start us off with this answer.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. I definitely do think there has been a shift, even just recently. I think speaking from the Hamilton North District School Board, we've seen, because of a lot of community advocacy and organizing, a lot of people have reached out to us and talked to us about what the education system looks like, and a lot of the work that we're doing. And like seeing how much support we've gone, for example, by getting police out of schools. And like a lot of the work that we've been doing, a lot of people have definitely seen that a lot of the curriculum that's been that's being taught in schools right now is still very focused on our colonial history. And so I definitely think that as the community continues to organize, more people start to really engage with us and understand that there are still a lot of flaws within our education system. And I think the board is also starting to become very starting to listen a lot more and be proactive in ensuring that there is that shift that is needed within that system.
Right, thank you. And Benjamin, what are your thoughts on that?
Definitely, in terms of, the struggles that Black students have faced, I think public perception has improved because, growing up, a lot of the students themselves, they saw what was going on, but, they never really said anything about it, and they kind of kept it to themselves. So as a result, the parents weren't aware, and, students just were afraid to tell their parents, I don't know, for whatever reason it was. But now that, students they're not being silent anymore, so they realize that, silence is, complicity, and now students are speaking up and parents are more aware. And it's great that, awareness has started to expand, outside of the Black community, to other parents, other community groups. I mean, you have at the last Peel rally, there was, the Tamil Students Association that showed up, Asians for Black Lives. We had starts with one, Jan leads that initiative. And then, even on the community level, you had, 13 Gurdwaras, Sikh temples. They signed a letter in solidarity with Black students and Black community groups. So I definitely think, more and more people are bringing attention to this issue. And I think one of the biggest shifts I noticed was when my mom, she first started to, bring this issue to light. My mother is a trustee with the school board. And, when she was bringing this issue to light, the Black community was kind of working alone within the Peel school board. But now we have such a diverse ethnic group of people coming together in solidarity, and, people are saying enough is enough. So.
Yeah, and I think you both touched on a really good point about how it's not necessarily happening in isolation with groups anymore. I think there's a collective effort that perhaps is more prominent over the past few months or years that have allowed for everyone to kind of realize maybe perhaps oppression is linked. What you're facing is not different from what I'm facing, and we can only tackle this huge issue together. So just to continue on, I'm going to have Ahona and Sally perhaps speak about this question, but what are some identifiable issues in education? Now, given that you're both student trustees, perhaps you have a unique perspective being students, but also being a part of the system to be able to identify concerns from individual students, but also concerns that people from the institution itself might be able to identify as well. So your perspective is very unique with this. So I'll get Ahona to start us off with the answer for this one.
For sure. I think that this is a really good question, but there are a lot of issues. I probably can't name them all. But for example, racism, transphobia, ableism, a lot of discrimination within our school boards in general. And I think one of the biggest things that we've seen that is really prevalent within our school boards is the lack of representation among staff, among elected officials, in regards to what diversity actually looks like within our schools. So hiring practices are, I'd say, very corrupt and not representative of our students. And as well as that, it's also the tokenization of students in general. So for example, Sally and I were both student trustees this year, but student trustees in general don't even have a vote, and they're the only people, the only stakeholders who are actually representing students at the board table. And I find this to be extremely problematic because no other trustees, even though they are elected officials, have the experiences of students in schools. So yeah, for sure. And I think the other thing is kind of considering the fact that the people who are in these high level positions, making high level policy and making decisions on behalf of our students, are oftentimes racist themselves or discriminatory within themselves. And that's extremely dangerous in terms of the way that we're looking at the safety of our students, the well-being of our students, and the success of them. And I think this is especially in regards to the fact that anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism are extremely prevalent within our school boards.
Right. No, those are some great points. And I think, Sally, you perhaps might share an even more unique perspective as you were recently the president of the Student Trustees Association across Ontario. So as a leader for that organization, what are some of the identifiable issues that you may have noticed?
Yeah, for sure, certainly. There are, it's plentiful. There's the achievement gap. There's the way students are penalized. There's all those kinds of issues, right? But if the shade of your skin can determine how what you're likely to achieve in school, or how likely you are to be penalized, I think another issue within the education system is that it doesn't actually exist in a silo. So what happens in society is taking place within our education system, and so just the issues within society of kind of racism and systemic kind of discrimination kind of find themselves within the education system, where it really kind of it's corrosive to students because they're starting off their time in society, and they're not shielded from that. So the education system, it doesn't do it right now, but what it really needs to do is be shielding students from kind of the way society operates and doesn't see them as human. But I mean, that's just kind of more of a perspective on the education system, I guess. But then in terms of leadership, and having served as president, I've noticed severe problems that were obviously very prevalent within the Ontario Student Trustees Association, but they weren't new. And I think there's a really, it's quite concerning that when we see these issues, we think they're new issues. So we say, I can't believe there's racism in the Ontario Student Trustees Association. I can't believe education systems are racist, when it's not. I can't believe they've always been racist, and what are you doing to actually stop those things? So it shouldn't come as a surprise, and the fact that it is coming as a surprise is problematic, because we need to accept that the inherent structures that exist, it's not even by accident. Like, they're actually created in order to maintain those structures. They have to be racist, they have to be oppressive, they have to subjugate people. And so really the conversation shouldn't be about whether racism exists or not. It's about what we are doing to combat it, and how we are protecting our next generation, and how we're making sure that our next generation has the tools they need to combat these things, because they're not new and they're not surprising. And we really need to get over this idea that we're shocked that it's happening, because we know it's happening and we're just not doing anything about it.
Right, and I think that's a great point that you bring up. The structure, as we know it, has always has had embedded racism, bias, oppression built into it. And in our last conversation about understanding Ontario's education system, I was able to have a conversation about legislation that actually speaks to this. So there was legislation that allowed for segregated schools in Ontario. We know that the Indigenous communities have had the residential schools. These are practices that are very well known in practice in Canada, and it is remarkable that people still seem to deny that fact. But jumping to our next question, and I think this kind of segues into it very well. We're all pretty young. Might be the oldest, but I'm still under 30. And I think it's interesting to note that 30 years ago, there may have been issues that are a little bit more nuanced than today and a little bit different in some ways. But at its heart, are we seeing some overlaps between issues then and issues today? Ahona, I'm going to get you to answer this question. What are some of the overlaps between the issues that we do see and are seeing today and those from, say, 30 years ago?
I think, Sally did touch on this a little bit. Like, these systems were built to oppress. And so the thing is, 30 years ago, maybe conversations around racism, discrimination in general weren't as prevalent. And acts of racism were more explicit. But now I think we're seeing a shift, whereas conversations are more prevalent, but racism is more implicit and it's more systemic and systematic. And so when we're trying to address issues of racism and discrimination, it's a lot harder to tackle it. So there are those kind of differences in that sense, but these issues have always been prevalent. It's like Batul said as well. Our classrooms and our school systems are based on, colonial frameworks. And that's one of the biggest issues that we have, that classrooms truly do need to be decolonized. And so 30 years ago, they did need to be decolonized, but they still do today. And so, of course, like, issues are extremely similar from what they were 30 years ago. But I think the kind of difference that we're seeing is whether or not they're out in the open, or they're being kind of swept under the rug or woven into the fabric of our institutions.
Right. And I completely agree. One of the reasons why I mentioned 30 years, however, is that about 30 years ago, they started to do, and when I say they, I mean the government or school boards, begun what would become a series of different reports on the education system. I can't remember the name of the one I'm referring to, but since 30 years ago, you see this trend of reports on inequities in the education system every couple of years. And there are probably literally over a dozen of them at this point about the different issues that we still talk about today in the education system. So Jen, what do you think is the importance of knowledge translation and how this speaks to the reoccurring issues that we are seeing today?
Thanks, Alex. That's a great segue to, I guess, why I'm so passionate as a non-Black person in the education advocacy space here. It's exactly true what you've mentioned. The last 30 years, from the work that I've been doing at Starts With One with the Education Justice Coalition, we've seen dozens of reports, as you're referring to, that demonstrate very clearly that, for example, there is an epidemic of discretionary suspensions unjustly committed against racialized students. There's evidence for this, and there's further evidence that this corresponds with their later entry into the criminal justice system here in Canada. There are studies like that that are Canadian-based, not just out of the American context. There are more studies that show that, for example, the top 1% of earners in Canada are 3 times more likely to hold a bachelor degree or higher, which speaks to the prevalence of how socioeconomic status continues to influence one of the most equitable education systems in the world, right? And, there's more and more research. There's like a 400-page paper put out by Dr. Alvin Curling, who is someone who's very prominent in the education space here in Ontario, titled The Roots of Youth Violence. And there, Dr. Curling speaks about how important it is to have a representative curriculum. And I just want to mention his words right now, but just to go back to what Dr. Curling said, this was articulated, decades ago now. Essentially, what Dr. Curling said was that if you have a curriculum that doesn't represent students, that doesn't talk about Indigenous history, that doesn't talk about Black history, that doesn't talk about the violent context of a lot of widespread immigration to Western nations, what you're saying to students is that their culture, people of their background, have had no valuable stake in building the countries that they live in now. And it gives a limited perspective of what these kids envision in their future, right? And so we see these recurring issues time and time again: racism, inequality, biases in schools. And I think for me, that's what is so promising about a panel like this, a discussion like this, because I think for the first time, with everyone in our generation being so literate in the digital space, with everyone being so connected, you know, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, even putting together a panel like this, I think that this is really an unprecedented time when it comes to sharing information and sharing knowledge. And I think that that's been the step that's been missing, because you have all of these fantastic reports and you don't have people who are dedicated to translating them. Because the fact of the matter is, you know, coming from someone in the higher education space right now, being at university, it's really shown me how inaccessible a lot of, you know, game-changing knowledge there is out there, and how difficult it is for people to read these academic reports. And, you know, if you think about it, if you've spent, you know, decades of your life putting together a 400-page report, you're not going to then spend another couple of years to make sure that, you know, it's in translatable bits for social media, or that it's really reaching out to the people that need it. You know, you're exhausted, right? And so I think this is where a conversation like this is so promising. You've got a whole bunch of people right now, all of us who are in higher education, and we see the importance of making knowledge that really changes discourse and alters the way people think about power structures in our society, including education, making this stuff accessible through advocacy. I think that's what's really important. And so just to get back to the question, which is, you know, are there overlaps between the issues we see today and those, say, 30 years ago? You know, absolutely. So I spoke briefly about the issue of how socioeconomic status contributes to education inequality, and how curriculum, again, it still hasn't been mandated that Black history be taught in schools, that Indigenous history be taught in schools, you know, how that is so important. Another issue that we see that hasn't changed much is there are many studies about implicit biases in Ontario schools. There is a really cool report that I'll be putting on the Starts With One website soon. It's a fantastic study that shows that when they controlled for EQAO scores, so they took a look at 6th graders who took a provincial-wide math assessment in Toronto, and they took a look at the people, regardless of their ethnic background, the students in grade 6 who scored the highest on this test. And they found that still, you know, white students, when compared to Black students, even in grade 6, they were disproportionately more likely to have an excellent standing in their learning skills in elementary school. And that affects streaming, right? And this is a report that was, you know, really difficult to dig up from the recesses of U of T libraries. And then we've got our Ontario Safe Schools Act. I'm sure everyone here knows a lot about this, but how that influenced the whole regime of discipline that has been negatively affecting racialized students since its inception. And there's so much research as to why this is the case. And yet, based off of everything that every single Black parent that I've spoken to has said so far, there isn't being enough done to mitigate the effects of this, to dismantle the negative impacts of the Safe Schools Act. And then again, we have these reports of sexual violence in schools, of mental health crises in schools, that these are issues that aren't being spoken up about enough either. And again, I really do think that this points to the issue of that lack of knowledge translation. And I'm so grateful that, you know, we've all come here today, because I think this is a step forwards in terms of that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So I think you actually identify one of the reasons why these concerns are still persisting. Ahona, are you able to kind of give us perspective, perhaps from the internal point of view? Why is it that these issues that we've all discussed so far, why do they still continue to be prevalent today? What are the structural reasons that enable this, based on your position in the board at the time? How does this continue to manifest? Why does this continue to manifest, knowing that we know these issues are there and something needs to be done, but nothing is being done?
Yeah, I think that there's a lack of accountability and a lack of transparency with the public, with the community, with students in general. So when we're looking at these issues, you know, community feedback, student feedback, it's not centered, and it obviously should be centered. And I think especially because trustees are elected by the public, student trustees are elected by the students themselves. It's important that these voices are centered and that they're honest and that they're transparent, but this isn't necessarily the case. So what I found a lot of the time is trustees obviously are supposed to be challenging staff, challenging the stances of the school boards within themselves, making sure that they're held to account and that they're considering the voices and perspectives of the public. But what I found during my term was that trustees and staff had kind of a buddy-buddy relationship. And so it was always, trustees were supposed to give staff the benefit of the doubt. Trustees were defending staff in general. And so what you're hearing from the public and the demands that you're hearing from the public, they're not considered, they're not centered, and that's a huge problem. Considering the fact that, these issues have been prevalent, again, for an extremely long time. And I think that if we were centering student voice, if we were centering community voice, then there would be a lot more action, but that's not necessarily the case within school boards.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you so much for that conversation on, just broadly speaking, Ontario's education system. Now we're going to pivot a little bit to the advocacy efforts that you each have had, and I'm going to ask some questions relating to that. So for this question, I'm going to ask Abisola and Benjamin to give us their point of view. So should students be advocates for issues in Ontario's education system? Or is it the responsibility of adults, particularly those running the system itself? Is that their obligation, given that they occupy some of the most powerful systems in Ontario, positions in Ontario's education system? So Abisola, I'll start with you.
So based on what I've seen over the past 2 months, when we first started our group, and when I was previously at Ryerson as well, I was on the Ryerson Student Union and I worked at Human Rights. Students should be advocates, but I think the people in power, for example, the adults running these systems, have to be the ones advocating on behalf of students as well. For example, like I see parents of Black children advocacy group here in York Region that they've heard their children's experiences and they've heard it through their friends and various people. And with that, they've been able to come up with transformative change. The only problem that I've been seeing is when students do advocate, they're lowballed and they are told that, this is all in your head. This teacher is a great person or this, that. And unfortunately, the students are always silenced. So I think with the help of adults and the help of trustees, for example, and all of that, if they work through their advocacy piece properly, then they should be able to make some, transformative change within the education system and advocate on behalf. But based on what I've seen over the past months and previously when I was in high school, students are literally the only ones advocating for themselves. We don't have teachers that advocate on behalf of Black students. We don't have teachers that advocate on behalf of queer students, Indigenous students. And when these students do speak up, they're silenced in their classrooms, they're made fun of. We have various stories of students here within your Catholic District School Board who, spoke up, and some of them were even suspended because apparently they created a ruckus. They were fighting and stuff. And it shouldn't be like that. We should have the adults that are responsible within these systems and stuff advocate on behalf of our students. They should be the ones in the forefront fighting for our students, because I remember when I was in high school, a lot of these things, based on what a lot of the folks on this panel have been talking about, we knew it was problematic, but we didn't know how to coin certain terms. It wasn't until let's say you learned certain words about anti-Black racism, then you're like, oh shoot, I was experiencing this because I am Black. It wasn't, it wasn't all in your head the way these teachers and, trustees or people on the board make it out to seem. So I definitely think students should advocate, but adults need to step up. They need to step up for their students. They need to say, hey, this student here is experiencing severe marginalization. What can we do to help? But as we've been seeing over the past, years, decades, and since generations and stuff, this hasn't been the case. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with you. If the responsibility did lay with the adults in the system to navigate these issues, they haven't been showing up. So, Benjamin, I'll pose a question to you. Should students have to be the advocates in Ontario's education system for a lot of these issues?
Well, I definitely agree that, if students can be advocates for the issues, then that's awesome. But I mean, it shouldn't lie on the students. I mean, in a perfect system, as Abisola was, mentioning, that the school faculty, the trustees, they would be the advocates for the students, but we see that that's not the case. So then I think that the adults who really should be stepping up at a time like this would be the parents, because the parents can have a direct impact on their students. So I think so from a perspective of a Caribbean, African parents kind of background, there's parents who they grow up in the Caribbean, and it's one of those things where their parents, they send them to school and they expect that they're going to be empowered when they get to school, they're going to be taught, and at the end of the day, the students they're well taken care of, because like my mom's mom would always say, oh, don't make me come into the school, because there's the expectation that if those parents are going to the schools, that means their child got in trouble. But I mean, that's different here. You've now moved, you've immigrated to a different country, and that might not be always the case. So the parents should be going into the schools. And as I mentioned earlier on in my previous answer, sometimes the lack of communication between student and parent, and that could pose a problem as to why there's the communication barrier between the two. But for example, I think it's really important that parents are, educating their kids on, their rich history. And if they're doing it at home, maybe they could even, come into the schools and discuss it, not only during Black History Month, but through many times throughout the year, through volunteer opportunities, to, cultural showcases, etc. You got to empower students, teach them, not only about the slavery and the oppression, but also about the victory as well. Not only about the, like the top five, they could say, American heroes, like Martin Luther King, Mandela, Tubman, I don't know, like Parks and Obama, but there's a whole bunch of other Canadian leaders, and not just big leaders, but community leaders as well, that students can be taught about and educated on. And I think definitely the parents can play a big role on that. I think I could relate to this, where I was in grade 5. So this was a terrible year, terrible teacher. I was in grade 5, and this teacher told our class, which was a primarily Black class, he said, your kind, referring to Black students, he said straight up, he said to a bunch of 9-year-olds, your kind doesn't go to university. Y'all belong in like college or a trade school. And he straight up said that to us. So me now, I'm 9 years old, thinking, oh, great. I'm hearing every day, every week that, from my parents that, oh, you have to go to university, work hard, get to university, etc. And then now my teacher's here telling me, oh, you people don't have to do that. So I'm like, oh, great. You know what I mean? But because I had that relationship with my parents, where I came back and they asked me, how was your day? What did the teacher tell you? So I'm skipping home. I tell my parents, oh, I don't have to go to university anymore. And then my parents are like, what? And they're pretty upset that their child is being told that, and then they have to reinstill it back in my head that you can get to university, you have the potential to do it, and you have to really be involved in your child's education. So yeah, but definitely it could be hard for a student to advocate for themselves, like Abisola said, but if that the people in power aren't the ones who are advocating for the students, I think parents have to really take on that role for the time being.
Right. I'm going to go a little bit off script and ask Batula a question. Batula, what do you think are some of the barriers for students to be able to advocate for themselves in Ontario's education system? If we're placing this responsibility on students who must do this since adults can't, we know that there are real barriers to that. Could you identify any of those?
Yeah, I think this work is one of the biggest things. I think this work is really isolating. Being one of the only racialized students in a classroom, for example, and having to call out racism or an instance of Islamophobia or something, this work is really isolating. And oftentimes, because a lot of our administration and our staff uphold these systems of racism and perpetuate it themselves, having to confront it is a barrier in itself, because of the fact that it's isolating and you won't get a lot of support. on top of that, if you're trying to report an instance, for example, it's not that easy to find the right people to talk to, be able to access your superintendent, be able to access the right people. And like, we've had a lot of community members and students and parents who have come to us and asked us the right ways to contact superintendents or even the human rights officer, because they're not that accessible. So as a student, having to advocate but not being able to access the right people to talk about these experiences with, it can be challenging to go about it in that way. And so I think when I, like, going back to like when I was in high school, for example, we had a few students who were able to rely on each other and like work together, and we had kind of a community, but a lot of students also don't have that. So being like the only student or in a school, having to advocate for yourself and a lot of your other friends and students who are going through the same thing, not having someone to kind of fall back on and get support from definitely becomes challenging.
Sure. Well, Gregory, I hope you're still there because I got a question for you now. Given that we know these barriers, these issues in Ontario's education system, school boards should be well aware of the different things that they need to do better, make things more equitable. But do you think that school boards are resistant to change? And if so, why? We'll throw that question to Abisola first, and then Greg, if you're able to join us, we'll get you to follow up. Oh, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I was just
okay,
trying
cool.
to talk and then realized I was muted. But
okay, no worries, man.
I feel like it's kind of obvious that they're resistant to change because every time there is an incident, it turns into a one-off. They always want to go back to the same protocol or the same absence of reviewing it. It's not like they've once ever sat down and been willing to say, well, actually, no, that's a lie. They have sat down and said, there is a bigger issue here and there's racism within our board. But at the end of the day, they've never went about addressing that through the lens of the community. I feel like.
Why do you think that is?
I believe, and from what I've seen, it's just a means of the majority of these boards have turned it into something where testimonials no longer matter, right? And I can guarantee almost everyone who's probably been on this panel has sat down, said something, or told them about a testimonial, told your board about an incident that happened, and it's they either want to say they were ignorant to knowing anything of the sorts could happen, they didn't realize racism was so strong within the school or so strong within the board, and that ignorance and that idea of it not being within the board gives yourself kind of it doesn't give you the ability to grow within yourself as an organization. So another reason I think that they've been hesitant to change is because, like I was, if you did watch the removal of the SROs and the vote towards that, just before that, I was in a meeting with Sharon Stefanian, I think it was, where we sat down, and after I think like a good combination of 30 minutes of us just talking in circles, it led to her saying that the board itself does not have a lived experience in regards to Black people's lives or lived experience in regards to how it feels to be discriminated against, oppressed, or even to experience racism. So if you do not have those lived experiences, who are you to decide or speak on those instances or decide how to change yourselves as an institution to create that environment for people to be willing or open to learn and be able to learn within that environment? So like I said, there's not really the awakening or instance. I feel like it's still very based off of ignorance that the board's hesitant to change and why we do not see change today. I think that at the end of the day, like I said, like we took it to Twitter, at the end of the day, the only time we really see action is when we call people out on Twitter, when we call people out using the media. Like other than that, we get no action. We get no reactions. When the Black Youth Council, when the Black Youth Mentorship Program was halted, it was because we spoke out to the media. That was a direct correlation. And then 2 days later, they stopped the program. And the only reason that was put back on so quickly, or the only reason it was put back together, was because we once again went out to the media and demanded it be put back on. So it shouldn't be, the resistance is obviously there. It's about us challenging the issues before it turns into a public scandal. And that's really when they want to face the issue, is only when it becomes public, or only when it's more than an individual issue. And the problem with that is that they look at every issue of racism, of every hate crime, as an individualized issue. And it's no longer that. It's a bigger issue with the whole system itself, considering the fact it was built off of colonial views, like Batul said.
Right. And Abisola, what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel school boards are resistant to change, and if so, why?
I have to agree with a lot of things Gregory said. You touched on a lot of points. Like their resistance comes from unawareness, and people are constantly bringing awareness. So, for example, with what we've been doing, you know, we've been tweeting, we've been posting on Instagram, bringing social media awareness and stuff. But it wasn't until we dropped like a specific school name that we got a message from one of the board, your Catholic District School Board members. But how do you pose protection for your Black students, for your racialized students, your queer students, when you don't even want to create transformative change? Like, so many things that are being taught in the classrooms are outdated. They don't work for Black students anymore. We have teachers that don't have the lived experience of Black students. And when we are trying to raise awareness and tell them, you know what, this is what we're going through, we're often just shoot aside in silence. So I think boards are also very resistant to change because it's something new for them. They don't get to oppress us anymore, right? Because if you tell a teacher that, hey, you know, you're racist, they're threatened. They say, oh, you have to suffer the consequences for that. We have to sue you. We have to do something like that. So I think resistance to change comes out of fear. And it's the fear of, if we empower these students, we are going to lose our credit, our credit. Like, we're going to lose the way people have known us so far, you know, because the system wasn't built for people, for racialized students. The system was built on white supremacy. The system was built on whiteness and colonialism. So, like, to create change, you have to bring in a very different cultural perspective from various people's lived experiences, various social locations. And these boards definitely are not down for that with what we can see. Like, another example is they come to the rallies sometimes, they come to the protests, but you still don't reach out to the students that have been advocating for months and telling you that, hey, there's racism here. We are experiencing it. So definitely, yeah. Sorry, I went on a tangent, but
No.
they are definitely resistant to change. Yeah.
Right. And I think you both bring up some excellent points, and perhaps the next question kind of becomes redundant. We know that there are historically disenfranchised and marginalized groups throughout the school system. We've identified Black students, Indigenous students, and racialized students from varying groups are disproportionately affected in many ways. So I guess I'm going to kind of tweak this question a little bit. And again, I'm going to pose it to Gregory and Abisola. Are all students harmed by having these issues not addressed? And what would the reasoning be for yes or no? Let's start with Gregory. Sorry, I changed the question on you, by the way, but I hope that you caught that.
I don't necessarily think all students are harmed. I do think that white people benefit from, not even, I do think 100% white people white people are benefiting from us being oppressed. And
Right.
that is what the majority of these issues are today. Not just oppression, not just racism, but that if you, not even if, when you sit down and you go back to either A, the origin, or B, the root cause of some of these issues, 9 times out of 10, it's based off of racism or colonial views. So when you are, when, let's just take it back to colonialism. When when white settlers came to this land, did anybody think, hey, those First Nation people, we should learn something before we destroy everything? No, they thought, let's just take it over. This will be our land. From then we can, from then after that, if they're still around, we can include them in stuff. Like they never thought to include us in things. They never thought to encourage our growth. They never thought to enhance or think about how we can emotionally be people. This does not make it doesn't make an advantage for Black students. It does not help any other race but white people for us to have these issues impeached on us or pushed onto us. Like at the end of the day, all students are not being harmed by police in schools. All students are not being harmed by the school to prison pipeline. That's, you can, there's studies. Look at the Ontario Human Rights Council's study for the disproportionate impact against Black students. That clearly explains it. Even if you look at the disproportionate impact, it writes down to Black people, marginalized communities, colored BIPOC students, Black and Indigenous people of color. Like it goes all the way down to it. But the people who have been least affected have always been white people.
Right. Abisola, what's your response to that question? And again, I changed it. Are all students harmed by these issues that we're talking about in schools today? Yes or no, or however you want
Oh,
to
sorry,
answer
can you
that.
hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay. This is like a very tricky one based, like I really liked what Gregory was saying. Like when you look at intersectionality and different social locations, you know, depending on your various intersections, you do experience harm. But going back to what Gregory said, we see that oppression and marginalization and microaggressions are being mostly experienced by racialized folks, queer folks, folks with disabilities within the school system and things like that. And like there's no protection. For example, I worked with a couple youth in Toronto with past pathways to education, and they students come every evening, and once in a week, and they talk to police officers and various members of the criminal justice system to learn more about their rights and stuff. And Black students were still very scared to come because of the reproduction of oppression that they were experiencing. Based on what Gregory was saying too, if you think about it, white students are not getting arrested for, you know, doing something that a Black student will do. Like a lot of persecution that happens to racialized students, it's literally because they're racialized. It's because they are Black. Like we have students getting expelled for absolutely no reason, whereas their white counterparts are getting awards, right? So it's just, and thinking back to when I was in high school as well, there's that intersection of if you're Black and then you're an immigrant. There's that intersection of if you're Black and then you have another identity. You're facing harm every single day. You're not experiencing a safe haven in these schools the way they propose them to be. You're literally being traumatized. So definitely we have our queer students being harmed, our Indigenous students being harmed. There was a student that spoke to me recently, and she's Indigenous, and her friend's father used to call her Little Abby. And I was like, oh, what does that mean? And he called her Little Aboriginal. Like, do you see how the oppressions they're facing within the classrooms are even being extended outside within their friend groups, with their families? So there's no protection of racialized students, there's no protection of queer students, and there's no protection of like folks with just various intersecting identities. But we do see the protection of white students because they don't face a lot of consequences that they could be facing for all of their actions.
Right. Now, Batul, given that many of you have taken on roles as advocates, what are some of the things that you have done in your role to address some or any of these issues that we've mentioned today?
Yeah, thank you. Myself, along with Greg and Hona, we're all members of HWDSB Kids Need Help. And so as students in the school, like for myself, for example, I'm going into my third year of university, but when I was doing a lot of this advocacy work back in high school, a lot of this work means sitting in meetings with principals, sitting in meetings with the administration, talking to the board as well, and sitting in meetings with the board. It becomes more powerful though when you're doing it with the community. And so doing this work with HWDSB kids, for example, because there's a lot of us, the work doesn't fall solely on one of us. And so it's really powerful. For example, one of the main things that we've just done was getting police out of schools and getting that program terminated. And it took a lot of us sitting down and sending out emails to board and taking it to the media, and also doing phone zaps and calling trustees. And so it's definitely a lot of work when you're doing this advocacy work, but it becomes very powerful when you're doing with a lot of people. And terminating the police program essentially took 4 years. We were doing this since 4 years ago. We were talking about getting this SRO program terminated, and it was only now that we were powerful enough to get that program terminated. So yeah.
Wonderful. And Gregory, I'm going to throw the question back to you as well. What role have you taken on? I know that you were part of the same group as Batul, but if there's anything else you wanted to add, please go ahead.
So I recently just graduated as well. When I was in high school though, I was a part of the Black Youth Council of my school. I found it, and then later on in the year, like I mentioned earlier, we ended up having to take action and having to address the racism and some of the issues that did happen in our school. Throughout the year, we faced a ton of little issues that decided to come up through white supremacy. Whether it be the football team trying to call ankle sweeps cotton picking, or the giant slur written in our snow behind Bernie Custis. Like at the end of the day, these roles, like earlier, they should not have to be relying on the youth or put the youth in these positions. But at the end of the day, like,
Right.
I'm glad that so many people are involved in initiatives like this, like the HWDSB Kids Needs Help, like the Black Youth Council, like some of the stuff the HCCI has been doing with the Black Youth Mentorship Program. Like at the end of the day, these roles are what's necessary for the world to keep relevance in regards to the issues that are happening at a student level. And that's the roles I took. I took both the Black Youth Council president and founder last year, and I also took, I am currently a member of the HWDSB Kids Needs Help, who did push for this police-free schools initiative in Hamilton.
Right. Okay. So my next question has, I think, a lot to do with a lot of media spotlight given on education over the past few months. We've seen the Peel School Board having to go through a review. We've seen the Ministry of Education taking steps to change legislation that will affect the streaming of students, the suspension of students under a particular age. We've seen the Hamilton Board remove officers from the schools and potentially other boards to follow along. my point is we've seen a lot of changes or seeming steps towards changes in Ontario's education. Benjamin, has public advocacy, mobilization, and public awareness been key to any of these changes that we're seeing throughout Ontario and the school boards today?
Oh yeah, 100%. I definitely think it has. I mean, we've seen so many active members of the community spreading the word, educating others. I mean, this whole panel is really active as well. So, of course, you know that's occurring. And then now that everybody's discussing these issues, right? So nobody can pretend like we're unaware. We have all this pressure on these boards to enact this change. And people are speaking out. I think I want to shout out Kala and Idris from the Peel District School Board, because these two Black gentlemen who they're showing up to every board meeting and they refuse to be silenced. These are guys who they were given these trespass basically they were illegal trespass letters because just because they didn't agree with these Black males who are really speaking up for Black children. They said, how can we silence them? So here, let me hand you a trespass letter. Of course those are overturned, but this is kind of the abuse that they were going through. These guys are defending trustees who are advocating for Black students, and these trustees would be receiving dehumanizing and constant verbal assaults. But Idris and Kala, they never got tired, and eventually crowds, they're getting larger and larger. And then you had staff who are starting to speak out, even though that puts them in a vulnerable position, because they're kind of speaking against I guess people who are above them in the hierarchy of the organization. And then they realized things, you couldn't get things done the same way as you had in the past. So these guys, they drew upon allies, they brought in elders, they brought in young people, elders such as like Marjorie Taylor and Madeline Edwards. And then the Black community, they went to policymakers. They went to the Ministry of Education, they went to lawyers. And then because the way to get this change is you got to embarrass the organization, you got to make their pockets hurt by suing them for human rights violations, and they did all that. And at the end of the day, an attack on one marginalized group is an attack on all of them. And honestly, I'm really proud of my mom. Again, she's a trustee with the board, for bringing light to this issue. And honestly, she couldn't have brought all these changes if she didn't have the community rallying behind her. And she always likes to say that you have people in power, but the community has the real power. So definitely, I think the community had a real role in mobilizing and bringing that public awareness. So.
But Tua, what was the significance of public advocacy and mobilization for the HWSD student group?
Definitely, that's definitely how we got a lot of our work done, with public advocacy and mobilization. Having people in the community to reach out to. I spoke about this quite a bit. The police program being terminated, that would not have been done without all the public advocacy and mobilization that took place. Like I said, a lot of students were fighting for this for the last 4 years. When I was in Westdale, the Muslim Student Association became the advocacy body in the school, and we were advocating for a lot of this stuff. But being able to bring this back to the community and having community support, and being able to come up with strategies and tactics to do big stuff like get police liaison programming out of school. And that's what it's all about. It's about being with community, and that's where that power lies. Definitely that program wouldn't have been terminated with all that without all that community advocacy and mobilization. And even a lot of the support that we got after that with the public awareness aspect of this question, a lot of the support that we got after that, and a lot of students even just being relieved, because we've heard of many received many testimonies of students who've had really terrible, racist, and traumatic experiences with police in schools. We've heard it all. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to ask this question for. I'm going to include Sally, Gregory, and Ahona. I'm going to bring you back for a second. Well, what impact has your own advocacy had in your local school board? I'm going to start off with Sally with this one. I'm going to let Ahona share and then follow up with Greg, who I particularly want to hear about the impact beyond your particular school board. So Sally, what has the impact of your advocacy been on in your school board? And if you don't mind reminding us what that board was.
Yeah, for sure. So I was a former student trustee of the Durham District School Board. And so locally, obviously, I was a big proponent of equity. I really advocated to have actually school board scholarships be altered so that they were actually more equitable to racialized students as well. Another thing I advocated for was feminine hygiene products to be available to all students, especially because the availability of those products was primarily had an impact on lower income students who maybe couldn't have the resources available to them. And then aside from that, I mean, in terms of some of the work that I've done across the province, can you guys see me? Okay, well, across the province, as president of the Ontario Student Trustees Association, we worked on an e-learning report to help reverse the mandate. So from 4 courses down to 2. And we did gather a lot of data regarding students and kind of how the education system is or is not equitable to them, and we collected data on that. But I think those are just things that you say you do, but I don't think that those are the things that really had an impact, because I think one of the things that it's really important to remember is that success within the system is not the same as resisting the system, and I think they're two completely different concepts that we really need to be aware of. And so I think that those were great things, but I think where some of the really some of the more powerful things came in was when I started kind of talking about the discrimination, the racism that exists within the Ontario Student Trustees Association and within these systems, because the way these systems work is it's not a matter of if they are corrupt or not corrupt, it's really a matter of how corrupt they can get before someone will say something about it. And so I think within my advocacy, I publicly called out the Ontario Student Trustees Association for a lot of the discrimination, the racism, the kind of the nepotism, the white supremacy that they continue to demonstrate. And by publicly, I had conversations in private, of course, but by publicly calling out what had taken place within the organization during my time as president, I had really raised the stakes because now there was an organization that really had a stellar reputation before this is now having to contend with, being called racist, being called white supremacists and patriarchal, because that's what they are. But as well, what is powerful in that is that when you call out a system, you have now given every single person around you permission to do the exact same thing. And so really you have galvanized an entire province of students who knows that if one individual could go become president of an organization and call that organization out, that means I can call it out in my school, I can call it out in my community, I can call it out in my school board, I can call out wherever it needs to be called out. And so it really just, that's what advocacy is, when you have power, but when you use that power. It's not enough to be in a position of power. You need to use that power to advocate for the things that haven't been advocated for before. And another thing that is I kind of learned during my time is that these systems, of school boards and education systems and the media and all that, they don't respond to morality, right? If you say what you've done is wrong or it's not good or you should be better, these systems don't turn around and say, you're right, I was wrong, I'm going to fix it. These systems respond to power. So you need to speak truth to power, and truth is power. You need to contend with power from a position of power, from a position of knowledge, from a position of strength. And when you occupy that position of strength, and when you use that strength, well, now you're in a place where you can contend with corrupt systems because you have just as much power as they have, and then it gets into the place we call change, and that's where change happens. That's where the catalyst for change really takes place. And I think that it's just important to remember that virtue is not going to end racism. Like just being good or doing what you're supposed to do is not going to end these things. The only thing that's going to end racism, discrimination, all these systematic problems is stopping these systematic problems, is calling them out, standing against them. And, you know, Malcolm X, you know, said the most dangerous barrier to Black liberation is white liberalism. So it's this idea that there's just this innocence, and there's just this idea that, you know, white society or white structures want to help, but they don't know how to. And what Malcolm X said is that these structures know exactly what they're doing, and they are dangerous because they say that they are there to help you, but they are not there to help you. And so as advocates, we need to recognize that these systems aren't there to help us, and to destroy the systems, especially the good ones, because the good ones are the ones that propagate a lot of these issues. And so within my time as president, I obviously pushed for equity within my role and the work that I did, but I as well called out the structures that inhibited it. And that was, I think, what was most powerful, and that's what I know will, for years to come, have an impact, because now, you know, the organization has adopted an anti-racist policy. They've adopted an equity policy. That wouldn't have happened if somebody didn't call them out. But what it also shows is that they can take action, they choose not to. And so what I've kind of done is use my power to challenge the power of the system. And what I've done is really given other people permission to use their power, their inherent power, to call the system out as well.
Right. Wow, those are powerful words. I'm so glad this is recorded. There's a lot of bars in there that I need to write down. But no, thank you for that. And I think what's really significant about your form of advocacy was that you were working within the school board. So you were able to illustrate that there's a difference between success in that system and the impact of your advocacy really being working outside of it. And that's a very powerful concept. I wanted Ahona to also be able to speak about her impact of her advocacy during her time as term as a student trustee. If you don't mind sharing your answer to the same question. Sorry, again, I went off script, but hopefully you might be able to have an answer for that, Ahona.
For sure, yeah. I think, you know, what Sally said, that's extremely important, considering the fact that I also was a part of the Ontario Student Trustees Association. And again, like she said, it's extremely, has a great reputation for sure, but we really don't realize what's going on from within the system, and especially because, you know, there isn't a lot of Black leadership, there isn't as much racialized leadership within these systems. And so calling that out is one of the most important things that we can do. And I think similarly, that's why I came forward with explicit instances of racism within my board of trustees, just because it's not a matter of, you know, individual justice. It's not a matter of, you know, getting justice for one trustee or one person or one, you know, individual who's experienced racism, but rather kind of paving the way and ensuring that in the future, you know, future leaders are not in the same position, especially racialized and marginalized leaders who want to make change, who just want to feel safe within these spaces. And I think another thing is, you know, even with initiatives that we had within our school board, like the termination of police, it's not about, you know, individual advocacy. It definitely is about mobilization and community support. So I think something that's really prevalent in education is saying, you know, education is a very slow moving, you know, like it's a very slow moving system, and you can't make change efficiently. You have to be patient. But this is absolutely not true. This is something that, you know, white and non-marginalized people of power are going to say, so that you feel as if you don't have the means to create change and the means to advocate for yourself. But I think something that we found, especially with removing police from schools, was that, you know, I was advocating every single day, calling trustees, talking to them, saying, you know, this is what our students are saying, this is what we need, convincing them on the daily. We collected testimonials, we had, you know, the public really supporting us, sending emails, like Batul said, doing phone zaps. We had, on the day of the vote, we had there was an action where hundreds of people showed up in support of the termination. And as well as that, we did have a trustee who actually showed up to that action exactly during that time while the vote was happening. And I think when we have that public pressure from like externally as well as internal pressure, that's how we can spark change. That's how we can like work together, come together at the right time, doing the right thing, as a community and as people doing ground level work within school boards. And that's how change is, you know, affected.
And Greg, I'm just going to get you to kind of speak on behalf of the other group in terms of this, the answer to this question. What do you think is the impact beyond each of your individual school boards or regions on the rest of the education system?
Well, a little hard to follow after both of you guys, but I think probably the biggest impact that we've had on the educational system right now, or as students, is one. I mean, as the Black Youth Council, um, that created a model for students within the school to create a structure of which they can advocate for themselves, and also advocate as well as organize within schools and bring that to the community to serve the community as well. But as the HWDSB Kids Needs Help, that organization made history that day they held that protest. That protest was ridiculously long. They danced in the rain. We were shouting for how long, handing out water bottles. We did everything we could to keep the night going. That was not only a moment for, I guess, history in Hamilton, but like the reason that expands beyond our school board is because that right there set precedent for any other school board to cancel the SRO program, for along with the Toronto District School Board, whose research was also a primary cause of our SRO program being canceled, that all of that advocacy behind that is what shows as the perfect guide, not even the perfect guide, an inspiration as to why and how other students can continue this. This is nothing more than precedent in my eyes, because at the end of the day, like, we are setting that stepping stone or creating the ripple that causes the wave. You know what I'm saying? Like, at the end of the day, you're only remembered by the legacy you leave. And the HWDSB Kids Needs Help right now has left a legacy of pushing for, no matter what change they need to see, pushing for that and making sure it happens. It took 4 years for those students who started the push. And by the end of it, they accomplished their goal. So as far as what impact we've had on our board, you could see it with the SRO program. As far as what impact we have on other boards and what impacts we could have on other boards, who knows? Eventually, we could all just do one giant Ontario-wide thing. Like, nobody ever really knows, right?
Yeah.
But the impacts we've so far had on other boards, like I said, was setting precedent and giving people models and examples of how to create this change and how to push for this change themselves.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And we're just going to wrap up with this last question for Jen and Sally. So given all the work that so many people across different school boards have done, how might working with other advocates across Ontario's education system, across these different school boards, whether or not it's a public, private, Catholic school board, how might working together, how does that impact anything? How does that change anything? What can this be used for in the future? Working together as a movement together. How do you think that might look, and what are the impacts of that? Or how does it even start, Jen?
Thanks, Alex. I forgot this question was coming up. Actually, I got so caught up in what everyone else was saying, which is fantastic. And yeah, just by means of wrapping up here, I think just to speak just to touch on what everyone else has mentioned about how systemic these issues are of discrimination and racism within the Ontario school system. That's why I think working with other advocates, communicating with other advocates, it's transformed the work that, you know, I've been a part of in the Peel and Toronto regions. And I think this is really something that will characterize this wave of advocacy and make it different from waves that have come before. The opportunity for all of us to work together and to see patterns in what we're seeing, because these are not isolated incidences, unfortunately. You know, these are multi-generational issues. These are happening at every single school, and even not just Ontario, across Canada. And so that's why it's so incredible that we have the opportunity to keep these avenues of communication open between all of us in this space, because again, it's important to, you know, call out that this isn't one racist teacher, this isn't one discriminatory school board, this is a whole system of power that needs criticizing every single step along the way. And, you know, so that's why I think it's so important that everyone keeps working together. It's imperative.
Mm. And Sally, given that you were literally the leader of student trustees across Ontario, how might working with other advocates across Ontario's education system support any of these one movements that occur outside of the system?
Absolutely. That's so important. And I think the distinction between, like you mentioned, inside the system and outside the system, but I would say there is no such thing as a separate struggle, because whether you are in the system or you are outside of the system or you are 10 kilometers away from the system, even if you intentionally decided to not work with people around you, you're fighting against the same system. So you're already working together because you have a common, I don't need to say enemy, but you do have a common enemy. And I think it's also very, very important to realize that the reason these systems are so powerful is because they work together. The media, education, criminal justice, they're all working together, and that's what gives them the power they have. So it's not a matter of if we're choosing to work together. We don't have a choice. That is our mandate. That is our kind of command that we need to do, really. And I think just as well, like I was kind of contemplating this, but you know, Blackness as a construct is it is inherently laborious, because what happens is that with kind of Caucasian white people, you know, they recognize the issues, but their reward for turning away is that they get a life of ease. So we'll take care of your children and we'll make sure your health is good and we'll make sure you get a pension if you just turn away and say that these issues don't exist, because everyone can see them. You'd have to be blind, and even if you were blind, you'd still be able to see them. So, you know, Blackness is always seeing these issues, and whiteness is always turning away from these issues because you're rewarded for it. And there's everything in the middle. But I think as advocates, we need to simply and collectively bear witness to what is happening. We need to say what is happening, because if people turn away but you refuse to turn away, well, then now there's a problem. Now people can't turn away when everyone is saying there's an issue. And now when it becomes more difficult to ignore a problem than to act on it, that's when we see change. So it's not a matter of if we're going to work together, it's we don't have a choice, and we're inherently already fighting the same struggle. So no matter where you are, if you're opposing the system, you're doing a service to everyone in the system, and there are ripple waves, there is a ripple effect, and it does have impacts, and it does set precedent, and that precedent is important to continue the movement. And I think I think advocacy is about two things. It's about seeing the truth and acting on that truth. And if we can see it and we can act on it, then if we all take the individual responsibility to do that, then we are collectively working together. And the collective isn't just we kind of come together and just do things. It's that a collective is a bunch of people who have decided to take individual action. So it's not a matter of like what what people who look like you are doing. It's a matter of what you are doing, and what you do can inspire other people to do that too. And that's what collective action looks like. Collective action is still an individual choice made by multiple people, and I think we need to recognize the importance of our individuality when we're taking collective action, because that is what power is. That's what fighting these systems is about. It's done with conviction, that you're doing the right thing, and you're doing it not just for today, but for 10 years from now, 20 years from now, because we need to start thinking about the future, because the present is based on the past. So we need to start creating the future. We need to start thinking about the future so we can actually really enjoy the future that we deserve, and that we, quite frankly, have no other choice but to demand. So I think certainly we are all inherently working together, and I guess being aware of that makes it easier, because we realize we're not bearing the burden alone, but we are all bearing a burden, and we're all advocating.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We're going to end the questions with that one in terms of the guests. And I think our audience can appreciate how amazing our young advocates have been throughout Ontario through the answers that they've shared today. But I want to give an opportunity for any of the participants to be able to ask their own questions. What I'm going to have you do is just send me a quick message right now and let me know if you do have a question to ask. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the opportunity to go on video or through audio, ask that question. You can direct it to any particular panelist, and hopefully someone will be able to follow up with your answer shortly after. And I noticed that, Albert, you may have had a question. I'm going to pose it to you, Albert. If you would like to follow up with that question, I will ask you to unmute. And if you want to go ahead and speak, you can do so.
Okay, hello everyone.
Hi there.
Hi, so my question is pretty simple. Well, not really simple, but we've got a bit of a political situation where definitely we've got teacher union groups, especially with teacher union groups being part of the OFL and CLC, which are Ontario Federation of Labour and Canadian Labour Congress, which is also, they also have very strong ties with the NDP as an example, as one of them, which often stands for social justice. And they often claim that the teachers unions often claims to be on the side of social justice and coming to marches, even though it's pretty clear that from these several months that they are the oppressors and clearly the opposite side of social justice in all their claims. There's been a lot of talk about people who work in police buildings and for the police, essentially helping them, being in unions and needing to kick them out because they are propping up the police. What are your thoughts about teachers unions when in this situation? And that, of course, I don't have anything against anyone who might be a teacher union advocate here, but definitely there is this debate.
Right. And if I could kind of just, perhaps if I'm understanding correctly, teachers unions, what's their role in, I guess more broadly speaking, the education system as we see it and know it, and the issues that are there. I think you identified a particular challenge, but I think more broadly speaking, what are teachers unions role going on, teachers unions role just broadly in the education system? It's an interesting question as well, and one that I've actually thought about in terms of what are teachers? Are they advocates themselves? Are they teacher advocates in that they should be always promoting the betterment of Ontario's education system? But you asked the question, I'm going to pose it again to the panelists to be able to kind of pick up on, maybe on the nuances of her question, or more broadly speaking, the way I just framed it. Does anyone want to take the opportunity to share an answer for that?
So somewhat about, I guess, if you're asking more or less the role of teachers in regards to social justice or teachers unions, the difficulty behind the teacher standing behind a student when they are advocating for students or trying to stand up for a social justice cause or issue, 9 times out of 10, if it is anti-Black, the teacher will lose their job. So it's about, in reality, it's about it's about whether or not that teacher is willing to sacrifice their silence for success, or if they're willing to stand up for what they truly think is right. But at the end of the day, we can't always expect them to make the sacrifice of putting food on the table after going to school to become a teacher for so long, throwing away or sacrificing that investment or that time it took to become where they are in life, how they are, or who knows their circumstances. We can't expect them to necessarily sacrifice that for whatever it may be, because at the end of the day, it's that choice. It's their choice. It may not be morally right, but at the end of the day, like, there are plenty of teachers who want to speak up, who would love the opportunity to speak up, but it's not within their ability to, because that's their source of revenue, that's their source of income, that's how they make their living. So it's a moral dilemma at the end of the day.
For sure, and I think you definitely touch on some of the challenges that teachers may face. Sorry, Sally, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I thought that was a very kind of it was a little complex, and it definitely did touch on nuance, but I thought that was I think that's actually a very, very good question, because I think it's entirely relevant, because, you mentioned teachers unions, the NDP and police, and how they kind of all coalesce to form this kind of somewhat bastion of liberalism, but not really. But I think that even within that as well, teachers unions, I'm not going to say they're inherently white supremacist, but I mean, teachers unions are very, very homogeneous and very, very white. So there's not necessarily any impetus to actually advocate for students of color or racialized students. There's no impetus to actually stand and say this is a problem. And I think, we say that, oh, because they're more liberal leaning. Well, I mean, think about education as an institution itself. If you just, in the grand scheme of things, education as a concept is pretty liberal leaning. Like, when you think of education, you think of a liberal institution. But we can see through this discussion that education is propagating racism, discrimination, the exact same things that you could point out in any other aspect of society. So I think that when you're talking about teachers unions and kind of like the NDP or anything like that, I think it's still the same issue. And just because it has a liberal sounding name or a more progressive sounding agenda, it does not mean that they're not propagating the exact same issues. And in fact, it's actually more corrosive and more dangerous, because they hide under the guise of liberalism and progressiveness, but they're doing the exact same thing. This is exactly, I'm a fan of Malcolm X, I'm sure you can tell, but this is exactly very similar to what's being said, where it's like, this idea of progressiveness or, white liberalism can change anything. But I think that the way to combat it is to call it out. We call out the things that happen in education. It's just as important to call out those liberal institutions or those progressive institutions, because if they're not standing for our needs, then they're not being progressive for us. They're being progressive for other people. And like, just the example, affirmative action, for example, that was designed to help Black students, but the people that benefited most were white women. These, when we do advocacy, oftentimes it's not actually Black students that benefit. It's white people that pose as being liberal and progressive. So if our agenda is not being served, then we must demand that our agenda is served until it is served. So I think that that's a completely valid question. We should call it out more, and it's imperative that we do, because if we don't, we are essentially being silent when we recognize that there are problems and they're propagating the exact same issues that happen everywhere else in society.
Wonderful, thank you. We actually have a couple of other questions following up on the teachers. So I'm going to have Angeline just go ahead and share as well. I'm unmuted you, Angeline, so you can go ahead when you're ready. Yep.
Okay. I actually am a teacher, so I'm a Black teacher, and I actually teach for the Hamilton board. I teach the elementary pool, and just listening to what you guys are saying and just talking about how Gregory brought up about how certain teachers do want to speak up. And I feel, especially me being a Black teacher, sometimes there kind of is a double-edged sword. I think someone said it the other day in reference to Black teachers. It's either you stay and fight, or you lose your job, or you're deemed as, say, quote unquote, unprofessional, or you stay for the kids. And there's always this constant battle. But as these kids are talking about, or just saying, you're still complicit. So just listening to them and just reaffirming, continuing what I have to do to protect my students and my kids. And not to say whatever the cost, but just if it isn't right, it isn't right.
Yeah. And I think you touch on the complexities of and issues within education as it relates to Black educators, who also face a very unique struggle of their own in terms of the impacts of oppression and racism against them, as well as the ones that the witnessing of these systems against young people. And having worked with people who experienced those kinds of things, there are very real repercussions for speaking out against those kinds of behaviors. So it's very understandable, and we can, I'm sure, appreciate the position that you're often placed in the system. But thank you for the work that you have been doing. And we're just gonna shift to Muna, who also has a question about teachers. Muna, I've unmuted you, so you can go ahead and speak.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much, everyone, for putting this together. This is really wonderful. I just wanted to touch a little bit on some of the things that were said. I think when we think about these systems and the way these anti-racist, anti-Black racism is steeped so deeply into all these systems that work together, like one of the other panelists has said, we must also do the same and find ways to work together. We presented in many formats the idea of having an anti-racism, anti-oppression framework to the board. We think that something like that, it would be a policy that is embedded in all of the things that they do, whether it's from hiring to conflict resolution to even the content of the education that our children are provided. This idea that racism or Black history is only meant for a select time in the year is a fallacy. We need to have these conversations at an earlier time so that children understand the role that they play in these institutions, right? But I will also touch on the fact that it is equally important for us to not simply ask, like someone said earlier, but to really demand meaningful change and not these sort of, Band-Aid solutions that sort of appease us for a little bit because, like many of you have mentioned, a board has been embarrassed in the media, or just, a consultation is thrown at us to try to understand and, learn better. And we sort of backtrack then and wait for that to happen, and nothing really meaningful takes place, right? So teachers, for instance, have an authoritative role in the classroom, but they can be an ally, just like obviously they can also be problematic and dangerous, right? But right now there isn't much that that gives them a reason essentially to really learn and educate themselves and become an ally. Teachers that do that are either singled out or find themselves not only fighting the system, but also fighting, perhaps staff or other senior decision-making folks, right? So what we'd like to see is that there is some sort of education that is a must for any teacher in Ontario or in this country who wants to be in a classroom with children. They need to have some of this education as part of their degree, that it's no longer sufficient for you to pick up few concepts around slavery, and maybe give children this sort of romanticized idea of what slavery meant back then and means till this day, right? In our country, it may not be called slavery, but we know that various systems upheld the notion of slavery and the notion of oppression when it comes to racialized and Black students. So I think it's highly time for us to not only collaborate and really find ways to build on each other's strength, but also to hold accountable these teachers, these institutions that are supposed to teach these next wave of teachers, So I put the challenge to all of us to really work together and collaborate. I'm part of the Human Right and Equity Advisory within the school board. Part of that committee has various members. We have 2 members from the Hamilton Wentworth District's School Board Kids Need Help group, Gashi and Sabrina, and we often have to find ways to sort of scheme and see how else we can make things move. That isn't always what is expected of us. We try to think of ways that we can get those that are around the table who may understand these concepts, but who may feel sort of uneasy about the lingo and that real push that it requires for you to take a stand, right? So the work is vast, but so is our power, and so is our opportunity to really collaborate and work together and find ways and solutions that will advance this, right? So that's my rant for the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you, Muna. And unless anyone else has any additional questions, I'm cognizant of time. I don't want to keep anyone, and especially our panelists, any longer. So what we're just going to do, move into now, is just going through any last words that each panelist may have. I'm going to limit it to only a minute, so hopefully you guys have some very brief but important remarks that you'd like to leave us with. So if you don't mind, I'll kick it off with Ahona, if you want to be able to share any last thoughts. And I'll move on from there.
For sure. I just want to say thank you so much for having me. It's a great opportunity. And I just want to emphasize the fact that in this work, in anti-racism work and anti-oppression work, the most important thing I would say is mobilization. So when we're doing this work, it's important for teachers, students, the community all to come together and work collaboratively, because if we're working against one another as marginalized groups, we're obviously going to get nowhere. So I think moving forward, making sure that we're being encouraging of internal and external support, and coming together as marginalized people, as well as along with allies, that's definitely going to be the most important thing.
Thank you so much. Abizola?
I just want to say thanks for having me again. And one thing that I wanted to bring up is performative activism. Over the last couple of months, I've been realizing that folks want to help. They want to help, but I think we shouldn't speak above the community members that are experiencing the marginalization. Like, you should be like an ally, but when we are doing allyship, just to be extra careful and not doing it for quote unquote clout, because the communities are still experiencing the detrimental effects while you can go on with your day. So like, mobilization is extremely important in showing up, because you can talk the talk, but if you don't walk the walk, nothing is being transformed. So that's just my piece for it. And thank you everyone for your wonderful and excellent words.
Thank you so much. Batul?
Yes, hi. To start off, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being a part of this panel, along with so many other phenomenal activists. I want to acknowledge that this work isn't just, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it's not, and these issues don't exist in one school board. As we can see, we're all panelists, some of us from the same school boards, but some of us from very, very different school boards. And we see a lot of these experiences are, they exist everywhere. And so I think it's all of this work and all of this advocacy is a part of a process of abolition. And I think an important aspect of community organizing and stuff is I think one thing that I really value about the work that we do and with HWDSB Kids is we also know how to take care of each other as a community while doing this work. And so I think all through this process of abolition, we're able to like take a step back and care for each other and see what everyone needs, because that's how we sustain ourselves and how we sustain each other. And I think that's really important. But like, yeah, there's a lot of work that still needs to get done. And when we learn and we continue to know better, we continue to do better. And like from our, like as a team, no one is disposable. And so that's one thing that's very important when doing this community organizing.
Amazing, thank you. Benjamin?
No, thanks again for having me. And you know, a lot of you guys, or all of you guys, spoke really well. And yeah, just keep doing what you're doing and don't back down. And of course, you've seen the results of the hard work. So definitely, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, Alex. Again, yeah, thanks so much for including me as part of this panel, especially as a non-Black student. And I just wanted to use my closing remarks to speak to any other non-Black people who are listening to this panel right now. Again, I think Abisola already mentioned the importance of actually, you know, doing the work and centering voices that are not your own. And so I invite other people to, you know, ally with this work and to join this work, because education is such a fundamental aspect of our society, and the fight that Black youth are leading right now benefits everyone. You know, an example would be dismantling SRO programs. Everyone can benefit from that. We all need more mental health support in schools. We all need people to use these funds for other reasons in our schools. And so that's just one example of how this work that Black leaders are leading right now benefits, you know, everyone in society right now. And so yeah, again, thanks so much for having me. And I hope that this panel inspires some people to join advocacy work in the education space, no matter what background they come from.
Thank you. And Sally?
Yeah, I think it was a really exceptional panel, and I think that it will have impacts for people listening who are able to take something from it. And I think that I think it's really important to remember that. So like, I think it's important that we understand that nothing is accidental. Like, there's nothing that exists that just happens to be there. And so if we recognize that nothing is an accident, we have to recognize that in our advocacy, we have to be intentional, because there was an intent to subjugate. So there must be an explicit intent to empower. And I think that in everything we do, we have to be exceptionally kind of intentional in that. And I say, and one other thing is that, you know, the way that the system is structured, it's ultimately structured to say that it's supposed to help us. So the education, you know, healthcare, whatever, they say we want to help Black people, we want to make your lives better. But that's not really kind of the case, you know. In the words of Maya Angelou, like, you know, do you want to see my head like bow down, lowered eyes, you know, shoulders falling down like teardrops, you know, weakened by my soulful cries, like that. They don't want to help. Like, that's what they want to see. They want to see Black people subjugated. So it's incumbent upon Black people to empower themselves. It's incumbent upon Black people to be intentional in the work that they do and continue to do the advocacy, and recognize that the farther you go, the harder it gets. It's never going to get any easier. We're never going to get to a place where it's paradise and things are easy, but we have to continually bear the burden and become stronger by bearing that burden. And that is kind of what emancipation, what liberation is like, to bear the burden of our humanity and to be fully human. And so, you know, just take from that what you will, and you know, just be intentional in whatever you do, because it's important.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, we'll get Greg to end it off for us. Thank you.
So I kind of wanted to finish it off by saying something that I said when I led the walkout at Bernie Custis. So at the end of the day, it was a line like, in a crowd full of students, the student voice will always be lost. or no, sorry, that was completely wrong. It was, in a crowd full of people screaming for justice, the student voice will always be lost, right? So if you guys want to sit there and analyze it, it's essentially saying like, regardless, we won't be heard. But if you look at society right now and think about everything that's been happening, majority of these pushes have been led by students. So I just wanted to say to any of the students listening right now in the panel, beware of the negative effects of this space. Yes, there is doxing, there are gatekeepers, there are all types of stuff, but also remember that at the end of the day, this work comes from a place of mutual aid 9 times out of 10. We try and support each other and we try to do the work to uplift each other. Like Sally said, this is something we should all be doing with intent, right? This isn't something that people should just think about one day and decide, hey, that's a sick Instagram trend. Let's hop on the Black Lives Matter trend, right? At the end of the day, we do not choose to be Black, but we live it every day. We empower ourselves every day. We need to push for the same royalty we are taught to think of ourselves as, to be seen regardless across the world. We need to be willing to go into things open-minded and not compromise our values or compromise our intentions to any racism or white supremacy we face. Always face the adversity with diversity. That's all I'm gonna say.
Thank you so much. And we're going to end it off there. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the panel. Thank you to our guests for joining us for this very important conversation. Our young advocates are doing great work, and there are many more out there who are doing great work as well. Hopefully we can continue to collaborate, have these conversations going. As a part of the Hamilton Education Law Program, I definitely want to have future conversations on definitely more nuanced topics so that we can explore different perspectives on different issues. Before the new school year begins, we're gonna be talking about the new changes for the upcoming school year and some of the issues that families and students might encounter in the months to come. So look out for that. I'm just going to ask the panelists stick behind just for a few more minutes. But thank you to everyone else. I hope you have a great weekend and look forward to having you involved in future conversations. Have a good one.